Hell yeah, that was sick. Time to make a YouTube video. Oh. Oh. Fuck.
8 hours later.
Smash. Pass. Smash. Smash. Hello everybody, my name is Nomad and welcome to my very first Borderlands 4 build video. Now, this video is quite different to the other videos that I've made on my channel in that I have zero gameplay and the game also isn't even out yet. So it's a bit hard for me to make an actual tested and validated endgame build or even just a leveling build or Vault Hunter guide without having played the game in the first place. But that's not going to stop me though. The game looks absolutely amazing, and in saying that, I've been way too excited about the prospect of maining Amon the Forgeknight, who I put some gameplay in the background from the official Gearbox channel, and I've done a whole lot of theorizing and coming up with some potential day one build ideas that I wanted to share with you guys. Now, as I said before, and I want to make this clear, these builds are completely theory based. They're not tested in game. They could completely suck when the game actually comes out, and everyone's going to laugh at me if these builds actually suck. But anyway, like I said, I'm way too excited about this game. I really want to start getting into theory crafting as early as I can, and I wanted to come up with some ideas that I wanted to share with you guys anyway, whether it be for you guys to try and use yourselves alongside me to test it out, or just get inspired a little bit to do some theory crafting off your own. Just wanted to share this. To plan and put together these builds, I've been using mobilitics.gg, who I've partnered with for Borderlands 4 to help flesh out Amon endgame builds, player guides, and general tips and tricks. I'll put the link to this build and also the website as well, so you can play with it yourself in the description down below. But without any further ado, let's get cracking. So for this build, I'm going to be using the Crucible skill tree for Amon. This tree is all about throwing axes, detonations, and elemental damage, using frost axes and incense axes to deal dot damage, status damage, and just deal a whole lot of splash damage through the detonation mechanics. This is a particularly new mechanic for Amon specifically as well, and this tree brings in a mechanic known as priming and detonating, which you can see on the card right now. So priming is triggered when you damage an enemy with a forge skill, which enables you to then detonate the enemy, which basically creates an explosion at the side of the primed enemy. So with that in mind, this build revolves around those two concepts and maximizing the uptime for the forge thrones through resetting durations and spawning as many as possible while your action skill is active. I also want to make mention to the fact that I'm going to be using some different terminologies, not just for this video, but just in my future build videos as well, known as trunks and branches when I speak to the skill trees. So when I say trunk, I refer to the sort of top part of the skill tree. Basically, when you think of a tree, it's that big thick part in the middle. And branches refer to anything that come off said trunk. So each tree has 3 branches for now, unless they decide to revamp the skill trees in the future. But yeah, whenever I say trunks, I refer to the top part. When I say branches, I refer to any of the 3 branches that come off the trunk. So there's a few skills that enable this gameplay loop, which I'll quickly explain. But once again, this tree, I haven't tested it in the game. These interactions might not work the way I think it does. But based on some gameplay I've seen on some streamers and the videos that Gearbox has put out themselves, I've had some idea that this is how it could work. But once again, we'll need to test it when the game comes out. So obviously, first and foremost, we start with the Crucible action skill. Simply put, this gives Amon forge axes, which can be thrown at enemies to deal elemental damage, and also to do the priming and detonation mechanics, which I explained above. So, in terms of skills that you pick up, you start with Executioner. This gives Amon some increased critical hit damage, and the effect gets doubled for a duration after dealing melee damage. There's a few other skills in the tier 1 that are pretty useful. Reload speed, for example, if you're planning to use TDOs, elemental damage, depending on the weapons that you get while you're playing through the game, and forge skill cooldown rate. And obviously, the way that cooldown works in this game, I haven't fully understood it. Well, we do have the numbers, might not work the way we think it does. Things could change, so I'm just going critical hit damage. That's always going to be a useful stat to have, and the fact that you can double it for a duration after dealing melee damage, which Amon is all about, you can see where this is going. You then also pick up Destruction Engine for extra forge skill damage and detonation damage. Once again, detonation is the name of the game for this build, so we're going to want to maximize the damage where we can. We then pick up Tempered Pyre. This skill is very useful in that it helps maximize the uptime off your Forge axes. So, as the item card suggests, whenever Amon activates his Forge skill, spawns a Forge drone which attacks enemies for a duration, dealing instant damage. And however, when you activate the Forge skill while the skill is active, it restores the duration of all the active Forge drones. So these Forge drones, when they hit an enemy, can prime them, you can trigger it for a detonation. So the more you can restore the duration of these Forge drones, the longer they're going to stay up, the more enemies they can prime, the more enemies you can detonate, and so on. And here's the thing that makes this build really, really useful, and it's the Endless War Augment, which is the augment of choice for this build. As the card suggests, primed enemies take increased gun damage for each stack of prime. If Amon detonates a primed enemy, a new Forge axe is spawned that seeks out a nearby enemy. So from the description alone, I'm sure you can see the gameplay loop that we're trying to put in here. Whenever you do damage, or whenever these enemies take damage that are primed, detonate them, a new axe is spawned, and that goes out and fires at an enemy. This axe can then prime another enemy, which can then detonate, which can then create another axe, and so on and so forth. So if this works the way I think it does, this could be a very useful skill. If it doesn't, well, this build will fall flat. But either way, we're going to find that out in a few days when the game comes out. So that's the augment of choice. Now moving into the tier 3 skills that we have in the trunk, we have Bellows, Twin Tempers, and Vital Organs. Vital Organs, you gain crit hit chance, synergize as well with the passive, you already get critical hit damage, increasing the chance of critical hits if you're using multi-pellet weapons like shotguns or fast-firing weapons, maximizing your chance to hit a crit, and then maximizing your crit damage, synergizes very nicely. We then move into Twin Tempers. This is an additional Forge drone that you can spawn that does cryo damage. So we already have the instant axes that get spawned as a result of Tempered Pyre. This one spawns an additional one that does cryo, which can also prime, can also detonate, so on and so forth. We then have Bellows to round out the trunk, and this, when Amon activates his Forge skill, he gains increased gun damage for a duration. And obviously we're going to be activating a Forge skill a fair lot, so any skills that work well with action skill starts is going to be very useful. And gun damage is never really something to laugh at anyway. So that rounds out the trunk. Now we can move it to the branches. Now we start with branch 3, go to branch 2, then branch 1, so you can explain my rationale as to why I pick certain skills. So, for the branch 3, we start with Raging Inferno, which has the action skill has a chance to critical hit and burn enemies when it does. This increases status damage, which typically scales off the damage you deal initially if it works anything like it did for previous Borderlands games. So if you're already maxing out your initial impact damage per se, having burn damage and crit damage based off the damage that you initially do is going to help a lot to basically cap out your damage as much as you can. We then have Reactive Armor. Because we're going to be detonating a lot, this skill is going to help with survivability. So every time you detonate an enemy, Amon gets his shields and ordnance cooldown restored, which is going to be very useful to continue to fuel that gameplay loop. We then pick up Reverse Explosion, which whenever Amon deals Forge skill damage, he creates a drone singularity for a duration. This is going to be very useful for crowd control and just keeping enemies at bay, keeping them close together, so detonations can maximize their impact. And then for the capstone, we pick Conflangerang. Why this capstone? Well, what it does is it helps to restore Forge skill cooldown, as you can see on the item card. So in terms of what it does, double-edged, so basically you merge the axes together and you can launch it out. Whenever you deal this instant melee damage, or whenever you deal this action skill, it does instant melee damage in an area of effect, gains increased radius, and leaves a trail of fire that does dot damage over time, which is going to be really useful once again for crowd control, because these singularities are going to be pulling enemies together. Chucking this out is going to be able to deal mass instant damage on scale. The added benefit of this skill is that whenever you cause a detonation or damage an enemy with this capstone ability, you restore Forge skill cooldown, which once again helps with re-releasing these axes, triggering Endless War, Twin Tempers, Tempered Pyre. You can see where this is going. For the branch 2, we pick Blast Furnace. Now, what this does is it increases the detonation damage and damage dealt whenever you crit an enemy or detonate. The more detonations you do, the more stacks you get, so because we're going to be doing a whole lot of detonations, we can more or less guarantee that while we're detonating, we're going to be increasing our damage dealt, which is going to be very useful. We then pick Armor of Contempt. This gives Overshield whenever Amon deals action skill damage, once again, good for survivability. Now, one thing I want to note here is that after you put all those points in, you have 2 skill points left. I've put that into Cacophony because you get increased ordnance damage and detonation radius, which is something that we want. Now, I've put 5 points in Armor of Contempt for now. However, depending on how this build plays out in terms of survivability, you can move the points from here into Cacophony to basically maximize your ordnance damage and detonation radius as well. There's another skill you can pick up here. If you want to try out different forge hammers, different forge drones, like a hammer forge drone, you can put points into here as well. However, I'm all about that axe life, so I want to try and use that as much as I can, using tempered pyre and twin tempers. But if you're someone that wants to mess around with hammers and hammer forge drones, you can try this as well. Deals a bit of extra melee damage and elemental melee damage, so it's good for maximizing your different status effects as well. So with all that said and done, as much as I would love to talk about gear combinations and what would be optimal for this build, we've seen such little gear out there that it's going to be quite difficult to predict what exactly would make the skill tree spec optimal. However, if I was to make an educated guess, any gun that deals splash damage, high fire rate, or a high crit chance, or high pellet count would synergize very nicely with this build. And why is that, you may ask? Well, we have skills like Vital Organs, which increases your critical hit chance with guns for a duration, and it's a kill skill. So, having a gun that either fires a lot of bullets in a very short amount of time, or just fires a lot of bullets by having multiple pellets, we're increasing the amount of time so we can crit, or increasing our potential chances for a crit, which in turn gets the bonus from Executioner, which is increased critical hit damage, which in turn synergizes nicely with this skill, where if Amon crits an enemy or causes a detonation, we gain increased damage dealt for a duration. And we also have Raging Inferno, which is giving our actual damage a chance to crit as well. So a lot of these skills that we've picked up revolve around crit. So having a gun that synergizes nicely with that can help boost our damage output and sustain damage over a long period of time as well. In terms of class mods, we haven't seen any class mods except for one, which is a affinity based class mod for Amon's blue tree, which obviously is relevant for a green tree build like we're talking about today. So your guess is as good as mine as to what class mod works best. But in any case, this build video is a bit different to things that I've done before, and once the game comes out, I promise the quality of these are going to be a lot different. You're going to get tested builds, a lot more information, because I'm actually able to play the game and figure out how things work and explain that better. But this is just a bit of a hype build, if you want to get interested in this game, and if you look into Theorycraft, wanted to give you guys a resource to look into that, and also just talk about a build that I've been cooking up in my own time as well. So I hope you guys get a bit inspired by this, or at least find it a little bit useful to try it out when the game comes out, or iterate it on your own and make it your own build. But at the very least, I hope this serves as a bit of a starting tree to work through as you all play through the game as well. So anyway, I hope this is useful, and I'll be back soon with more builds and guides, just like I was doing for Moze in Borderlands 3. So I'll catch you guys soon. See ya.